Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing my June wrap-up. I read 13 books in June, so there's lots to talk about, but I am gonna see if I can maybe edit myself down a little bit because it is so hot in this room. This room is always a little bit stuffy, but I also have to turn off my fan while I'm filming so it doesn't make background noise, and we are still in the midst of a heat wave, and so it's very warm in here. So we will see. I am not always good at condensing myself, but we'll see if I can do it for my own survival today. So 13 books in June. It was not a month of high highs for me. There were a few books that I loved. I had a reread, which of course I love and rate highly. There was a contemporary romance series that I found at the very beginning of the month that I loved, but it felt like for the majority of the month, a lot of my reading was not terrible. It was a lot of things that were like 3.5 stars, a couple of 3 stars. It just felt very in the middle, which was fine. Like, those aren't terrible ratings, but there wasn't a lot that I had like strong feelings about, and especially because I feel like the last 2 months I at least had one like real standout read in May and in April, and this one I just didn't really have anything like that. But you know, well, let's just get into it. We'll start with my fantasy read. First up is The Goblin Emperor by Katherine Addison. This book I have kind of been meaning to read like for a while. It's sort of been in the back of my mind, but I was like never super excited about it, and then for some reason this month I just got this like impulse to read this book, so I decided to pick it up. This is a standalone that then has like a connected novella and a connected series to it, and this is following a goblin emperor. So it's set in this fantasy world where there are, as far as I can tell, 2 primary like magical races. There are goblins and there are elves. Our main character, Maya, is the youngest son of the king of the elves, and he is the only one of the king's children who is also half goblin. He has been kind of sent to live in isolation with only like a couple of servants and one very mean cousin to raise him. And then the book starts out with a messenger arriving in the middle of the night to tell him that his father and all of his older brothers have died in an accident and he is now emperor. So he is to travel to the palace to take on this new mantle that he never expected to have, that he has no experience with court life, with this world of politics. He's not been trained for this at all because nobody expected this to ever happen. And so we're following him as he is kind of learning about and navigating court life and what is expected of him in this new station. There's a lot of like the kind of cultural nuances and nuances of like power and station that he just is not aware of, that he is having to learn very quickly and learn who he can trust and who is he going to be as an emperor, because his dad was not a great person from what we know. He met his father like once in his life. But so we're following him through this journey, and then there's also kind of a subplot of trying to figure out what happened, how this accident that killed the emperor and like almost all of his sons, what happened there. So there are a lot of like moving parts to this. And this book, I think that like it kind of had some real ups and downs for me. The first like quarter of the book, I was really loving this. I think the writing is really good. I think that she does a really good job of like writing like interiority for the character. The first section of the book is very just like in his head as he is kind of trying to figure out what's going on, sometimes panicking of like, oh my god, what am I supposed to do here? There's a lot of reflection on just kind of the world and some world building about it. So there's actually very little like dialogue. It's very in his head, and for the first section of this I really liked that because I felt like her characterization of him was very strong. There are things that he was doing that were kind of going, I was like, oh, this is going to come back around and kind of build up something in the plot. And I liked the kind of introspective nature of this, and I was very invested in it. Then I kind of reached a point in the book where I was expecting or wanting the story, or especially like the relationships, to advance a little bit. I think in the first part, you know, it really emphasized also his feeling of isolation, even though now he's like surrounded by so many more people than he ever has been, but he feels so isolated because of this new station that he has. And he doesn't really know how to deal with that. And I liked that, but I felt like for me that kind of carried on a little too long. And so there was a big chunk in the middle where it felt like the story kind of stagnated for me, especially because it got so into like the minutia of the politics of this world in a way that I think for some people they might really like. There was one thread of the politics that I was particularly following and really interested in, which was the bridge, but there were just a lot of other things for me I would have been more invested if it was somehow tied into more like character relationships in the story. And then the ending, I felt like, not the end, but like the last section kind of came back around and did sort of do some of the things that I was kind of hoping for that had been set up at the beginning. It did start to like get a little more into some like relationships and him sort of figuring himself out as to like, how can I have like be in relationship to other people even with this very isolating station that I am in. And some elements of like the mystery and like and some of the politics kind of came back around and like tied up in a way that I really liked. So this one, I had some like mixed feelings about it because there was just this chunk in the middle that I was like, I feel like I'm kind of slogging through this because there's just like, there's something that was missing for me personally. However, I know a lot of people really love this, and if you're interested in that kind of like the minutia of the politics of this world, I think that it could be very fun. This has a very like cozy quality to it. I think her writing is really good. The character of Maya, our main character, is very endearing. I really liked him as a person, and because he's so genuinely just like a good person trying his best. And I love that for him. So there is almost this like cozy quality to it. And in some ways it kind of reminded me of another series that I love, which is the Penrick and Desdemona series. I think I gave this 3.5 stars. And then I did end up listening to the audiobook for the novella in this series. So that is my next book, which is The Orb of Kairado. I think that's how you pronounce it. That's the other thing actually in both of these books, this one and Orb of Kairado, I found the names to be very like difficult to follow for some reason, which like is always interesting to me when that happens, because I have been reading fantasy for a very long time and I've read a lot of fantasy, a lot of like weird fantasy names, weird fantasy words, all kinds of things. And yet once in a while I run into a certain fantasy where I'm like, these names are much more difficult for me to like hold on to who is who. And I found that was the case with this world in both of these books that I've read from her. And I'm not sure why that is, but I think that also contributed to me being a little less invested in that like minutia of politics, because it was a little harder for me to follow. But maybe that's just a me thing. Anyways, Orb of Kairado is set in the same world. It's taking place at the same time as the Goblin Emperor because it does reference this new Goblin Emperor kind of coming to power, but it is not connected to that. We're with totally different characters. Our main character in this is a former scholar. He was accused of stealing a artifact and was kicked out of the university. At the beginning of the book, his best friend has died and has left him a page from a mysterious book, and this page like is a clue that leads him to I don't know, I don't want to spoil too much because it's not a very long book, but it leads him on a new mystery that could help him get back his old life, or it could get him in really hot water, and it sets off the, like, in that process they find another mystery which then creates a whole other problem. And I really enjoyed this one also. I think that maybe I enjoyed it more because I was listening to the audiobook, and because it was shorter, so it didn't like drag as much for me. In some ways this also reminded me of Penric and Desdemona, and I gave this one 3.5 stars as well. I'm kind of debating whether I want to read more from this author and from this world, because she then has another series which is following a character that I believe was introduced in this book, if I am thinking of the right person, who is then, I believe the next series is kind of, each book is a mystery. And I'm not always a big mystery person, but I did like The Orb of Cerrado, so maybe I would do them on audiobook. I'm not quite sure yet. If you've read that series, let me know what you thought of it. Another like cozy fantasy that I read this month was Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher. Because I had recently read some other T. Kingfishers, I just felt like I'd give Sword Heart another shot, especially because the second book is coming out this year. It may have already come out by now, actually. But in Sword Heart, our main character is a widow who has been living with and taking care of a relative of her deceased husband. That relative has recently passed, and his family has kind of descended upon his home to take his money, pretty much, because he left everything to her, and so they want to force her into a marriage so that they can have all of his money. And she does not want that to happen. She does not want to marry within the family. And while she is trying to find an alternative, she accidentally discovers a magical sword which has a warrior living in the sword. So when she unsheathes it, he appears and he helps her to escape, and they set out on a journey to find essentially to find like a lawyer to help them get the house and her inheritance back. And there is of course a romance along the way, because this is like a cozy romance. And I thought this one was fun. It wasn't my favorite thing from T. Kingfisher, but also not my least favorite. There were points where I felt like I feel it dragged a little bit, but overall, like, I generally liked the characters. There were times where I felt like the love interest maybe spent too much time talking about, like, thinking about her body, which I was like, we do not need you to describe how attracted you are to her again. Like, I get it. There's always like a balance, right? There's a point where it's like, oh, I want to know how much he likes her, and that he's attracted to her and stuff. And then there's a point where I'm like, okay, you can stop telling me about how hot she is. But I liked the characters. They were very fun, and it was very like cozy. I would consider reading the second book. It's not one that I feel like really like compelled to continue on. It was something that I was like, oh, cute, and then sort of moved on. And I think I gave this one 3.5 stars also. And then I have two more fantasies to talk about, and one of them was very disappointing for me because it's an author that I love, but it is The Mercy Makers by Tessa Gratton. This is the first book in Tessa Gratton's like current ongoing series that she's writing. Tessa Gratton also wrote The Queens of Innis Lear and Lady Hotspur, which I love, and The Queens of Innis Lear, or I guess the Innis Lear duology, some of my favorite books of all time. So I was really excited that she was back to writing an adult fantasy, because she usually does YA. And it's just always disappointing when an author that you love writes something that you're kind of like, meh, about. So, all right. This is set in a world where there is a type of magic called human design that is not just illegal, but heretical. It is against their religion, which is this kind of magic where you are able to change people's bodies. And so then anything that even borders on human design is also heretical. Our main character, Irisette, is the daughter of like a crime lord, but she doesn't really engage with crime, but she does do illegal heretical magic, and she's very good at it. The book really kicks off though with her father's like, wow, the only word I can think of is home base, but that's not the right term. But like they're like headquarters, that's what it is, being raided, and him being captured, Irisette being captured. And she also, this was the other thing, is she actually has an alter ego called Silk. And so Silk is known as this practitioner of the heretical magic, and Irisette is just his innocent daughter. And so she is captured as Irisette and has to hide her identity as Silk. She's brought to the palace, initially imprisoned, but then is kind of plucked out of imprisonment by the sister of the emperor, and she kind of becomes like one of her companions. And this is letting her sort of infiltrate into palace life as she's trying to figure out how to free her father. And then some other things happen that she has to deal with as well. I started out reading it physically, got about 30% of the way in, and was like, I don't know if I can keep going with this. Then I switched over to audiobook. It was definitely better on audio for me. And I think part of that is because of the just volume of world building in this. Honestly, the thing I think that I struggled with the most in this is that the book is primarily, like really primarily, world building. There are long, like, expositional passages just explaining things about the world, its history, some of the kind of like mythology behind it, or just a lot of describing how the magic works. And yet I also still never felt like I really understood the magic system. What I ended up feeling like was a lot of this world building. It's not that it was irrelevant, it was relevant to this world, but it was really unnecessary. Like there's a tipping point between like world building that is necessary and world building that is just I don't know, it just doesn't like add anything. And really it just ends up bogging me down. Again, for somebody who is like really there for the world building, maybe you'll love this. I like world building, but I'm really here for the characters. And this felt like it was mostly world building, very light on the actual characters or plot, honestly. I also will say this book, first of all, it has been like marketed as romantasy. Is not romantasy. That is a wild way to market this book. Makes no sense. Do not read this expecting romantasy. It is world building first, then some like political intrigue, little bit of plot, little bit of characters. That's what's happening here. Now, it does talk about sex quite a lot in this book. It is, for a book that is talking about it quite a lot, and is also marketed as being very like sexy. I found this book incredibly unsexy. The way that they talk about it is incredibly dry, and also I just was like, I honestly don't care about this. And I think that a lot of that is because I was so unengaged with the characters or the relationships. Ultimately, it didn't land for me. I just feel like the tone and the vibe of it wasn't something that I was like that into. I felt like the world building started to feel kind of like self-obsessed, that it was so into just telling you a lot of information about the world without focusing as much on like plot and character. And yeah, it also did not really deliver on the like promised like sexiness of the book, which is not why I was reading it, but still, like, if that's what you're promising me, that's what I'm expecting from it. Anyway, I gave this one 3 stars. I doubt I'm gonna continue on with this series, which is kind of sad, and now means that I have to wait for her to finish this trilogy and then see what she writes next after that, and see if it continues on in this vein. It seems to me like she's kind of had different, you know, eras in her writing. That Strange Grace and the Queens of Innisleer were kind of an era that was more like atmospheric, foresty, which was definitely more my vibe because those are some of my favorites from her. And then Nightshine and Mercy Makers, while they're very different, seem more in line with each other. Like this is a different kind of era in her writing or the influences that she's pulling from. And I did like Nightshine, but it's just not a vibe that I'm personally as invested in, so we'll see. I'll just have to wait until we see whatever she does next. Then my last fantasy is Gwen and Art Are Not in Love by Lex Croucher. I picked this one up because it has a lady knight in it, and I was kind of hoping that I would like it in a similar way to what I liked about Ladies' Night by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner, which I read last year and really enjoyed, as this sort of like light-hearted, intentionally anachronistic, you know, medieval knight retelling, right? And I think that this had some similar qualities, but it didn't really hit the mark for me. So this is sort of an Arthurian adjacent story. Arthur was a real person. We are following some of his descendants, even though it says Gwen and Art are not in love. These are not Guinevere and Arthur from Arthurian legend. And so we're starting the story where they are betrothed. They are having to kind of meet each other again for the first time since childhood. They have hated each other since childhood. And so we spend the first half of the book really establishing their kind of dislike of each other and then their relationship. They do end up having a blackmail situation, so they kind of strike a deal with each other. And I think that for me, part of this was the pacing didn't really work well, because the first part of the book spends a lot of time establishing Gwen and Art's relationship, which makes sense for the story, but I also then was like, well, I want to know about these other romances that are supposed to happen, and those didn't happen until later in the book, so that then there was a lot less time to establish and get invested in the other like romances that were going on. And I don't know, I never fully got invested in the dynamic between Art and Gwen. I don't know, this one I considered DNFing it a couple times. I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. All right, now on to my reread of the month, which was my favorite thing that I read, unsurprisingly, considering I already love this book, which was ICARUS by Kay Ankrum. This is one of her YA contemporary standalones. We're following our main character, Icarus, whose father does art restoration, but he also does art forgery, and there is this one guy that he hates, and he for years has also involved Icarus in forging art so that they can steal art from this one man and replace it with a forgery. And Icarus, because of this, is not really allowed to have a life outside of their home, because if people start, you know, asking too many questions, if people come over to their house, they might find out about this illegal activity. However, one day when Icarus is scoping out some art to be stolen in the home, he is discovered by the son of this man, who he didn't know that he had a son at all. But his son is kind of under house arrest and is not allowed to leave, is not allowed to see anybody, and so strikes a deal with Icarus that he will not tell his father about what's going on as long as Icarus continues to come visit him. And then the two of them develop this very like intense relationship in this kind of isolation, or this kind of like bubble of the two of them in secrecy. This is the first time I've reread this book. I still absolutely love this book. It's one of my favorites, I think, from K. Ankrum. I have a whole review of it from the first time that I read this, so I'll link that in the description if you want like more information about it. But as always, like, I love K. Ankrum's writing. I like the way that she writes in these like very like pointed vignettes. She writes in a way that just feels very visceral, and part of why I wanted to reread this was because I had recently read The Wolf and His King by Finn Longman, this one, and I remember thinking that the writing was different, but it made me feel a similar way as to how I feel reading K. Ankrum. And so then I was like, well, now, because after reading The Wolf and His King, I was like, I want to immediately reread this. I was like, you know what I'll do instead is I'll reread a K. Ankrum book, because yeah, although the writing is certainly different, it makes me feel a very similar way. So this was again a 5-star read. This was fantastic. Loved rereading it. I should just reread all of her books all the time. Okay, so we're on to the contemporary romance, which I hopefully will get through a little bit faster. First up, we have the Breakaway series by E.L. Massey. This is a YA contemporary hockey romance that the first 2 books are following one couple, and then there are more books in the series that are following other couples. I only read the first 3 in the series because the 4th one doesn't have an audiobook yet, and I do really like listening to these on audio. But in the first one, our main characters, one is a professional hockey player who is gay but is like not out yet. Our other main character is an out figure skater who has had a traumatic brain injury, and so he's now at a point where he's kind of trying to gain back a lot of the proficiency and strength that he had prior to his injury. He ends up going on like a fake date with our other main character, because he kind of jokingly is like, haha, I want to go on a date, and the other's like, haha, sure, and then they actually are like sort of dating, but also like it becomes a very confusing situation for them, because one of them thinks that they are just friends and that he's like, oh, the hockey player is like pretending to date me, and the other one is like, no, I really do want to date you, but I'm not out and I can't tell you this. And so yeah, it's just very confusing for them, and it's just like a very cute, wholesome story. And also the figure skater, he has a like medical alert dog who is a German Shepherd named Huck. I remember the dog's name, obviously. But truly, this is one of the best written like dog characters that I've come across, because like there wasn't a ton of time spent on the dog, but still it's like the dog felt like a dog. There was characterization to the dog. The dog did like quirky little things that I was like, yep, I've seen a dog do that. Like the dog, sometimes when there are dog characters, they completely disappear until like the one moment where they're needed, and then you're like, who was taking care of your dog this whole time? Like, as a dog person, I am concerned about who's letting out the dog. Anyways, his dog was very consistently in the story. He was like thinking about his dog, taking care of his dog. It was characterized in a way that felt like a lot of those little like, you know, interactions that you have with an actual dog. I just really liked the dog in this one. But I really loved the characters too. It was very sweet. This series actually, especially these first two books, but the series in general, almost felt to me like they could exist in like the Game Changer world, but they are like YA, you know, like fade to black or closed door romances. So very different in that way, but they feel like they kind of could exist in the same world. And actually in the first two books, there is even a character on the hockey team who is this kind of like hotshot, kind of arrogant but jokey Russian character who definitely like clocks them before they come out. And I was like, okay, so Ilya exists in this world. So I just found these absolutely delightful. The second book is like takes place in the same universe. In this one, our main character is kind of trying to make a life for himself through hockey. His father, I believe, is in prison, and he doesn't have a lot of money, and so I think he's gotten a scholarship to this like prestigious private school that a lot of hockey players are recruited to the NHL from this school. This was probably my favorite of the three that I have read so far, but I really enjoyed the whole series. I think I gave each of them 4 stars, or the third one was between 4 and 4.5 stars, and I'm really excited to read the fourth book. I believe the audiobook is coming out in December. I also read Something Wild and Wonderful by Anita Kelly. This is the second book in the Nashville Love trilogy, because I read the third book first and then the first book, and now finally got the second book because my library finally added it to their catalog, which was very exciting. Our two characters meet because they are both hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, which is a very long and intense trail. I don't know that much about trail hiking, but I know that much. And so they kind of run across each other. They've never met prior to this, and they end up hiking together and, you know, become friends, eventually fall for each other, of course. And this one kind of almost feels like a sports romance. I guess, is hiking a sport? I don't know, but I did enjoy the like hiking setting. As I'm reading more like sports or sport adjacent romances, I am developing real opinions about like which are the sports that have good vibes for romances, and then which are the sports that I'm like, I don't like the vibes of this sport. And hiking was a good one. Yeah, I think that this may have been my favorite one of the trilogy, actually. Then I also read The Prospect by K.T. Hoffman. This one is a baseball sports romance, which is a male-male romance with one of the characters is a trans man. And also kind of a second, I don't know if it counts as a second chance romance. They knew each other and then kind of parted ways, and then they end up on the same team again. And they kind of like think that the other one doesn't like them, and then they like end up together, obviously. So it's sort of second chance in a way. And this one was fine. I have discovered I do not like baseball as a sport. Not good vibes for a sport for a romance, in my personal opinion. I am sure there are people who will disagree with me. I also realized I know very little about baseball, and also the names for things don't mean anything to me, because I had to Google a bunch of stuff about baseball to be like, what is a shortstop? Why does this matter? Like, also I was Googling like, which is the most like prestigious position in baseball, because the two of them were kind of like fighting over, or like they were upset over that they both wanted to be shortstop, and I was like, I have no idea what that is. And also, is that an important position? I don't know. So I had to look that up. Whereas like some other sports, either I know what they are, what some of the things are, or the names just are obvious. Like, it's just obvious what that is based on the name of the position. Anyways, I found baseball confusing. And apparently I know very little about it. Yeah, I thought this one was fine. I gave this one 3.5 stars. It wasn't super memorable for me, but it wasn't bad. Another one that was kind of like just sort of decent for me was Cleat Cute by Meryl Wilsner. This one is a sapphic soccer romance, which soccer, much better vibes for a sports romance. And in this, our two main characters end up on a soccer team together. One of them, they're similar ages, but one of them has been playing professionally since a very young age, and the other character has been playing in college and is called up to a professional team, so she is just joining. And the other main character has been like her soccer idol for a long time. Now, I feel like I have read a few books this year where the romance is between two characters where like one of them was their like idol growing up and now they're like having a romance later on. And I don't really like that dynamic. I can imagine why other people might like it. I don't particularly like it, but it also depends on kind of what is the state of their relationship now and how much does one idolize the other. I feel like this one managed to do it pretty well. I felt like the character was able to kind of go like, now that I know you as a person, I don't kind of have that idolizing relationship to you. So it didn't feel weird, which I appreciate. And I gave this one 3.5 stars also. And then the last book that I will mention is actually a nonfiction, which I so rarely read a nonfiction. It's very exciting, which was The Dog's Gaze by, what's the author's name? Thomas W. Lacour? I don't know how you say his last name. I'll have to look that up. But this is essentially about like art history kind of like how dogs have been represented in art and what purpose they serve in art. A lot of the book also builds up like the origins and evolution of domesticated dogs, the ways that they have evolved alongside humans and have evolved to more closely live with, support, and mirror humans so that we feel a greater like connection and utility, honestly, out of dogs. And then from there it sort of builds up, talks about a lot of different examples of dogs in art, and particularly some of the reasons that dogs would be added to art. Like a lot of times they would put a dog in a piece of art just because it added realism, because dogs are so ubiquitous and would be so much just a part of people's lives that to have a dog just made the painting feel more realistic. But also specifically, like the book is called The Dog's Gaze, it talks about how where the dog looks in a painting can direct the eye of the viewer. Because we have evolved so much with dogs, we understand dogs' expressions so much, and we attribute so much meaning, intention, thought, or emotion to dogs because of the relationship that we've built with them. In a painting, where they are looking can be very meaningful to a viewer, and we'll kind of instinctually look at like, what is the dog looking at? Whereas other animals we don't necessarily treat the same way, because like a horse might just be staring off into space, or a cat might be intentionally ignoring whatever is like the focal point or like the action happening in the scene, whereas the dog will turn its attention to whatever like the action or the focal point is. Anyways, so I just thought this was really interesting. I am a dog person, and so actually my favorite part of this was the section that was really talking more about like the evolution and origins of dogs. Some of the stuff I already knew, but some of it was new. I will say though, there is a portion of the book that does talk about the representation of dogs in media, specifically referring to like anti-vivisection media. Anti-vivisection is the work to stop using animals in like research and testing. And so there have been a lot of different campaigns that of course use images of like sad dogs to promote you know, stopping using animals for research, because of how obviously it harms them. And so there was a section about that, but that was like very difficult to listen to because it does talk about some of the like things that have been done to dogs in like animal testing and stuff, and so that just, if you're interested in reading this book, just be aware of that. But that is the end of my June wrap up. I don't think I succeeded in being any less long-winded than usual. So every time I try, it just never happens. We'll see how I edit this down. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Let me know how your June reading was, but thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.